Hey guys, tonight we're not digging up a pharaoh or exploring a battlefield. Instead, we're in a glass and steel boardroom somewhere in London or New York. The air is sterile, smelling faintly of expensive carpet cleaner and anxiety. Men in suits that cost more than a car are looking at a deck, and the key slide is just a name, Mavin Records. They're not just buying a playlist, they're buying a system, a machine for minting superstars built by one man. This is the story of how a quiet kid from a Lagos slum built a music empire so powerful, the biggest company in the world just had to have a piece. For a rumoured $200 million. It's a journey of talent, timing and brutal business acumen. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. The level of patience, foresight and sheer luck required is something most mortals just lack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As always, drop your city and what time it is in your part of the world in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. His name was not always Don Jazzy. Before the accolades, before the hits, before the millions, he was Michael Collins Ajara. He was born on November 26, 1982, not in the sprawling, chaotic heart of Lagos, but in Umuahia, the capital of Abia State in southeastern Nigeria. His father, Collins Enabali Ajara, was an Isoko man, and his mother, an Igbo princess, was a trader. This blend of cultures, Isoko and Igbo, was the first of many combinations that would define his life. But Umuahia was just the prologue. The real story, the grime and the glory, begins when the family moves, packing their lives into bags and hopes, and lands in Ajegunle, Lagos. To understand Michael, you must understand Ajegunle. AJ City, as it's known. It's not just a neighbourhood, it's an entity. It's a sprawling, densely populated, low-income microcosm of Nigeria itself. Ajegunle is where the drains are open and the music is loud. It's the smell of frying plantain, generator fumes and damp earth, all mingling with the constant thumping bass of high-life Fuji and reggae. This is a place where survival is an art form. You learn to read people, to hustle, to innovate. You learn that nothing is given. While other kids were running wild, Michael was different. He was quiet, observant, a sponge. He walked through the chaos, but he wasn't of it. He was watching, listening, processing. His father, a man with a deep love for music who had dabbled in production and artist management himself, saw this quiet intensity. He encouraged it. The family was deeply religious. They were devout members of the Cherubim and Seraphim Church, or CNS. This wasn't the quiet, staid Anglicanism of the old colonial masters. This was vibrant, ecstatic, percussive faith. This is, in fact, a quirky tidbit that is central to his entire story. The CNS Church is famous for its white garments, its spiritual fervour, and most importantly, its complex, intoxicating polyrhythms. It's a wall of sound. Drums, congas, tambourines, clapping and powerful harmonised singing. For a young musically inclined boy, it was the ultimate classroom. This is where he found his calling. He picked up the bass guitar at age 12, and soon he was a fixture in the church band. He learned to play the drums, the piano, the traditional percussion. He wasn't just playing music, he was learning its architecture. He was learning how a bass line anchors a melody, how percussion creates tension and release, how harmonies can lift the soul. This was his apprenticeship. Analysts still argue whether his time in the church was a purely musical education or a deeper spiritual and commercial one. The CNS Church, like many Nigerian Pentecostal movements, is a massive, organised and often wealthy institution. Michael wasn't just seeing music, he was seeing organisation. He was seeing branding, the white garments, community, the congregation, and performance, the service itself. He was absorbing the mechanics of how to build a loyal following from the ground up. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the band, he was the quiet kid taking notes on the entire operation. This, combined with his mother's Igbo-fueled trading instincts, was creating a formidable mind. He attended the Federal Government College Lagos, a decent secondary school that pulled him, at least temporarily, out of the Ajegunle bubble. It was here the name was born. He was already so proficient, so obsessed with music that his schoolmates called him Don Jazzy. Don for his mastery and Jazzy for the music. It stuck. It was a brand and he was already wearing it. But even with the name, the future was uncertain. Nigeria in the 1990s, particularly during the Abacha regime that followed the Babangida years, was a place of immense struggle. The Nigerian economy, which had boomed with oil in the 70s, was now buckling under structural adjustment programs and rampant corruption. This is a historical fact that framed the choices of an entire generation. You either had connect, or you found a way out. Michael had talent, but talent alone didn't pay the bills in a broken system. He was a don, but he was a don in a place where the ceiling was suffocatingly low. He could play any instrument, he could hear a song in his head and map it out. But what was the path? The Nigerian music industry of the late 90s was a shadow of what it would become. It was dominated by Fuji, Juju, and a nascent hip-hop scene that was mostly imitating its American counterparts. Producers were backroom technicians, not celebrities. They were paid a flat fee, and the artist took the glory. Don Jazzy, the quiet observer from AJ City, the church-trained multi-instrumentalist, knew his worth was more than a flat fee. He saw a bigger picture. He saw a system that was broken, a system where the creator of the sound was the least rewarded, and he filed that observation away. The family, like many Nigerian families, saw a future abroad, not as an escape necessarily, but as an opportunity, a chance to get skills, education and capital that simply weren't available at home. In 2000, at the age of 18, his uncle, a pastor, invited him to London. The plan was simple: come to London, play drums for his uncle's church and find his way. Michael packed his bags. He left Ajagunle, he left the CNS church, and he left the Don Jazzy nickname behind, or so he thought. He landed in London as just another face in the diaspora, another Nigerian kid trying to make it. The goal wasn't to build an empire, the goal was to survive. The quiet kid from Umuahia, forged in the sonic furnace of Ajagunle and the CNS church, was about to get a very different kind of education. He was about to learn the cold, hard and unforgiving calculus of the real world, working a job that was the polar opposite of a don. London was a shock to the system. It was cold, not just in temperature, but in its vast impersonal indifference. This wasn't the communal chaos of Ajagunle, where everyone knew your business and the air was thick with sound. This was a city of hurried footsteps, downcast eyes, and a constant damp chill that seeped into the bones. Michael Collins Ajara, the don of his local church band, was now just another immigrant, a face in the crowd on the tube trying to find his footing. His uncle's church provided a base, a familiar rhythm of worship and music, but it didn't pay the bills. And the bills in London, he quickly learned, were relentless. He needed a job, or rather, he needed several. He found work as a security guard, a bouncer. It's a detail that has become legend, a core part of the Don Jazzy mythology. Picture it. The quiet, observant, slightly pudgy kid from Ajagunle, the one who preferred a bass guitar to a brawl, now standing at a door, arms crossed, trying to look imposing. He was, by his own admission, a terrible bouncer. He was too polite. He'd be the guy saying, "Excuse me, sir, I'd rather you didn't," as someone stumbled past him. He also famously worked at McDonald's, flipping burgers, his hands, which were trained to glide over piano keys, now slick with grease and smelling of processed fries. This wasn't a failure. It was a baptism. It was the essential, ego-crushing grind that forges discipline. He was learning humility, but more importantly, he was learning the mechanics of a different kind of system. The efficiency of a fast food chain, the logistics of a security rota. His mind was still taking notes. This was the peak of the Nigerian brain drain, a historical fact of the late 90s and early 2000s. The political instability and economic stagnation back home, even after the return to democracy in 1999, had pushed a whole generation of Nigeria's brightest and most ambitious to seek their fortunes in the West. London, especially areas like Peckham and Hackney, became a little Lagos. This created a specific quirky subculture, the Yand hustle. Yand, a corruption of John Bull, an old nickname for England, was a place where you did whatever it took. You could be a university-educated lawyer driving a minicab, a princess working as a cleaner, or a musical genius flipping burgers. The hustle was the great equalizer, and everyone was in it together, maintaining a front of success for the family back home while scraping by. But Michael wasn't just flipping burgers, he was networking. The Nigerian diaspora in London had a vibrant, if underdeveloped, music scene. He gravitated towards it. his talent an undeniable passport. He hooked up with a group called the Solek Crew, playing bass for them at gigs in Nigerian halls and weddings. This eventually led him to the orbit of one of the biggest names in the UK Nigerian scene, JJC, and his collective, the 419 Squad. This group, featuring artists like JJC, the 419 Squad, and a young MC named D'banj, was trying to fuse hip-hop, R&B and Nigerian sounds into something new. Don Jazzy, with his deep well of high-life rhythms, church harmonies and production skills, was a revelation. He became their studio rat, their in-house producer, finally back behind a keyboard, and that is where he met him. Dapo Oyabanjo, D'banj. If Don Jazzy was the quiet, calculating strategist, D'banj was the sun. He was pure, unadulterated charisma. He was loud, flashy, and utterly convinced of his own stardom. He didn't just walk into a room, he arrived. D'banj was the son of a high-ranking military officer, a different social stratosphere from Ajigunle. He was supposed to be a mechanical engineer, but he'd fallen in love with music, specifically the harmonica, which he'd picked up after the tragic death of his older brother. D'banj was all frontman, all energy, all cocoa, a slang term he'd later popularise for, well, everything. Don Jazzy, the producer, saw in D'banj the one thing he lacked: a vehicle, a star. D'banj, the performer, saw in Don Jazzy the one thing he lacked: a sound, a sonic architect who could build the anthems he heard in his head. They became inseparable. Don Jazzy would be in a corner of a cramped London flat, hunched over a rudimentary production setup, a desktop computer, a copy of Fruity Loops, a cheap MIDI keyboard. D'banj would be pacing, harmonica in hand, freestyling, brimming with hooks and catchphrases. It was a perfect symbiosis. Jazzy's beats were infectious, a blend of the percussive drive of the CNS Church, the groove of Ajigunle, and the clean, hard-hitting sheen of the Western hip-hop he was absorbing. D'banj's energy was the rocket fuel. They created a demo, a raw, exciting sound that was undeniably Nigerian but unlike anything else. But London wasn't listening. Not really. They were a novelty in the UK, too African for the mainstream, too foreign for the grime scene. They were stuck. This led to the great debate, one that music analysts still argue over. Was their decision to return to Nigeria an act of supreme confidence, or a desperate last-ditch gamble? Were they visionary pioneers returning home to build a new market, or were they a failed UK act retreating to a smaller pond where they could be bigger fish? The conventional wisdom in 2004 was to do the opposite. You made it in Nigeria, and then you went to London or America to blow. The idea of taking the skills, the polish, the Yand hustle, and applying it back in Lagos was insane. Lagos was the place you left, not the place you returned to. But Don Jazzy, the quiet observer, had been watching. He saw the Nigerian-owned record labels in the UK struggling. He saw the disorganisation, and he remembered the system back home. He remembered that it was broken, and in a broken system, a man with a new blueprint can become a king. They scraped together their money from security gigs, from McDonald's, from small-time shows. It was a pitiful amount, barely enough for 2 plane tickets and some studio time. In 2004, they packed their bags, leaving the cold, indifferent grey of London. They were flying back into the heat, the chaos, and the opportunity of Lagos. Lagos, in 2004, hit them like a physical force. The moment they stepped out of Murtala Mohammed International Airport, the city assaulted their senses. It was a wall of wet, oppressive heat, a cacophony of car horns, shouting marketers, and generator growls. This was the Lagos they had left, but they were seeing it with new eyes. Janned eyes. They had left a city of orderly queues and cold indifference and returned to a 24/7 hustle, a chaotic free-for-all where everyone was a CEO of their own small operation. Their London savings, which had felt meagre in the UK, felt even smaller here, evaporating daily under the dual pressures of Lagos life and their own ambition. They were 2 men with a single, shared and frankly delusional goal: to build a record label from scratch and take over. The Nigerian music scene they re-entered was not a vacuum. It was a kingdom ruled by established gods. The dominant force was Kennis music, founded by Kenny Keke Ogungbe and Dio D1 Adonai. Kennis was the machine. They had the radio connections, the TV plugs, and the biggest stars, including the legendary Two-Face Idibia, who had just gone solo from Plantation Boys, and the controversial but popular Idris Abdul Karim. Then there was Storm Records, the slick, hip-hop-focused label. These companies were the industry. They dictated the sound, the style, and the business. And in their world, the producer was a guy in a dark room who got paid a flat fee. The artist was the star, but the real stars were the label executives, Kiki and D1. This is a crucial historical fact. Kennis Music in the late 90s and early 2000s had almost single-handedly professionalised the visual aspect of Nigerian music. They were the ones who pushed for high-budget music videos, shot on film, often in South Africa or the UK, and created the Afrobeats aesthetic that MTV Base, which launched in Africa in 2005, would eventually broadcast to the continent. Don Jazzy and D'banj weren't just going up against a label, they were going up against the very people who had built the stadium they now wanted to play in. Their gamble looked less like a strategy and more like suicide. They settled in, pooling their resources to rent a modest duplex in Maryland, Lagos. This became the headquarters, the studio, and their home. The living room was the office. A bedroom, soundproofed with cheap foam and mattresses, was the vocal booth. And in the centre of it all was Don Jazzy, on the same worn-out desktop computer he'd hauled back from London, still running his cracked copy of Fruity Loops, now known as FL Studio. This was the engine room, while D'banj, the charismatic Minister of Enjoyment, was out in the Lagos clubs, networking, shaking hands, and using his high-octane charm to build a buzz. Don Jazzy was building. He was in that room, sometimes for 24 hours straight, fueled by an obsessive work ethic, crafting the sound. This is where Mo Hits Records was truly born. The name itself was a statement of intent, more hits. It wasn't just a label, it was a promise, but it was also a new model. Analysts still debate whether Mo Hits was a true 50-50 partnership of equals, or if it was, from day one, Don Jazzy's grand experiment, with D'banj as its first and most brilliant test subject. The latter seems more plausible. Don Jazzy wasn't content to be the backroom guy. He saw what producers like Timbaland and Pharrell, as the Neptunes, were doing in the US, becoming stars and brands in their own right, their sound being the product, not just the artist. He decided he would be the brand too. He would be the African Pharrell, the visible, celebrated architect. This led to a quirky tidbit that would become his sonic signature, the producer tag. The simple, spoken word, "It's Don Jazzy again," that he inserted at the beginning of his tracks. It was a genius piece of branding, a corporate stamp of quality. Before the song even started, you knew who made it. You knew it was a Don Jazzy beat. It was audacious. No Nigerian producer had ever dared to brand their work so front and centre. It was a power move, subtly shifting the hierarchy. It wasn't just a D'banj song, it was a D'banj and Don Jazzy collaboration, every single time. They were a perfect symbiotic unit. D'banj, with his irrepressible energy, was the frontman, the entertainer. He brought the slang, the swagger, and the harmonica. That harmonica, another piece of branding genius, made him instantly recognisable. And his central philosophy, the cocoa, was the ultimate marketing tool. The cocoa was a wonderfully vague, all-encompassing term. It could mean the main point, the money, the woman, the essence of life. It was cheeky, slightly scandalous, and infinitely adaptable. Don Jazzy provided the sonic canvas. He was crafting a sound that was at the time revolutionary. It wasn't just aping American hip-hop, it was a raw, muscular fusion. He took the heavy, percussive rhythms of Fuji music, the melodic sensibilities of high life, the bottom end of hip-hop, and the ecstatic energy of his CNS church days, and blended it all into something sleek, minimalist, and undeniably African. The beats were often simple, built around a core drum pattern, a thumping bass line, and a single hypnotic synth line. This simplicity left a massive space for D'banj's larger-than-life personality to fill. They had no money for the payola system, the unofficial but mandatory fees paid to radio DJs and presenters to get airplay. They were locked out, so they bypassed it. D'banj would take their first recorded single, Tongolo, on a CD, walk directly into a nightclub, and charm the DJ into playing it, right then. He'd perform it live, on the spot, his energy infectious. The club would go wild. People would ask, "What is this song?" The buzz started from the ground up, in the sweaty, aspirational heat of the Lagos nightlife. They were, in modern terms, executing a blitz-scaling strategy, but with no capital. All they had was pure product and relentless hustle. The old guard, Kennis and Storm, had the infrastructure, but Mo Hits had the sound. They had the brand, and they had an insatiable hunger that the comfortable kings of the industry had long since forgotten. They were about to light a fire. The sound Don Jazzy was crafting in that makeshift bedroom studio was an act of deliberate rebellion. The dominant Nigerian sound, heavily influenced by Kennis music, was either saccharine R&B or a fairly direct imitation of American hip-hop, often layered with busy, complex instrumentation. Don Jazzy's beats were the opposite. They were minimalist, stark, and built around a single, undeniable groove. He stripped everything back. His primary instrument was the drum, or rather the idea of the drum. He took the syncopated, rolling percussion of traditional Fuji and Apala music, translated it into a digital hip-hop context, and then anchored it with a bass line so heavy it felt physical. This was the genius of the Coco sound. It was deceptively simple. On the surface, a beat might just be a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, and one weird, squelching synth line. You'd listen and think, that's it. But that simplicity was a trap. It was a masterclass in negative space. That space, that silence between the notes, is what made it groove. It was a beat that a cat walking on a Casio keyboard could almost accidentally play. But the cat wouldn't have the CNS church rhythm, the Ajagunla swing. Jazzy's beats demanded that you move. And into that vast open space he unleashed D'banj. Their first album, No Long Thing, dropped in 2005. It was less an album and more of a 12-track manifesto. It was raw, unpolished, and absolutely pulsed with energy. The title itself was a piece of slang, a mission statement. No long story, no time wasting, just get to the point. The lead single, Tongolo, was the perfect introduction. It was built around a hypnotic looping beat and D'banj's harmonica. The lyrics were audacious. D'banj wasn't asking for a chance. He was announcing his arrival. The Coco, he explained, was the main point, the secret, and he was the Coco master. It was brilliant, nonsensical, and totally infectious. This album was their ground zero club hustle strategy paying off. They had no major distribution. They were in effect a startup using street teams and their own personal connections to push the CDs. But a seismic event was about to happen that would change the game forever. In 2005, MTV Base Africa launched. This is the mainstream historical fact that cannot be overstated. For the first time, African artists had a dedicated 24/7 high-production value platform beamed across the continent. Suddenly, the visual was just as important as the sonic, and this is where the Mo Hits Jand polish gave them a killer edge. While some local videos were still, let's say, charming in their low-budget ambition, Don Jazzy and D'banj understood imaging. They had seen the slick videos of Jay-Z and P. Diddy. They knew that to be stars, they had to look like stars. They poured what little money they had into the video for Tongolo. It was clean, it was aspirational. It showed D'banj as the charismatic harmonica-wielding playboy, and, crucially, it featured Don Jazzy. He wasn't just the producer, he was in the video, seated, king-like, often with a decadent-looking staff in hand, the silent puppet master, the Don. This visual branding was revolutionary. It established the label as a crew, a family, a dynasty. It was the producer and the artist side by side. But it was the follow-up album, 2006's Rundown Funk You Up, that detonated the bomb. This album was a cultural reset. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a string of anthems that would define an era. The lead single, Why Me, was the final perfect fusion of their model. The beat was a masterpiece of tension and release, a Fuji drum pattern given a monstrous club-shaking makeover. D'banj's persona was now fully formed, the lovable, harmless rogue, complaining about his inexplicable charm. Why me? Why I conde sweet like dat? Why me? The video was an event. It was high gloss, full of beautiful women, and it cemented the Mo Hits aesthetic. And the slang was a virus. This is the quirky tidbit that demonstrates their total cultural capture. Mo Hits didn't just make music, they manufactured lexicon. Suddenly, all of Nigeria was speaking their language. No long thing. File, meaning dismiss or forget it. Cocolette, a beautiful woman. Coco itself became the most versatile word in the Nigerian dictionary, a blank canvas for any and all desire. It was the money, the sex, the car, the good life. You weren't just listening to a song, you were opting into a lifestyle. an exclusive club. And the entry fee was just pressing play. Analysts still debate whether Don Jazzy invented the modern Afrobeat sound or simply perfected its marketing. The truth is, he was a brilliant synthesizer. Artists like P-Square were making incredibly polished R&B-infused pop. Two-Face Idibia was crafting soulful, timeless ballads. But Don Jazzy was the first to create a sonic brand that was as identifiable as a Nike swoosh. That "It's Don Jazzy again" tag became a Pavlovian trigger. You heard it, and your brain prepared for a guaranteed 4-minute blast of euphoria. He had taken the backroom role of the producer and dragged it, kicking and screaming into the spotlight. He was the co-star, the silent, brooding, staff-wielding Don to D'Banj's flashy Coco master. They were now officially the kings. Kennis music, the old empire, seemed slow and dated in comparison. Mo Hits was young, hungry, and had the streets, the clubs, and now, thanks to MTV Base, the entire continent in a chokehold. They weren't just two guys from London anymore. They were the architects of a new sound, a new language, and a new, ruthlessly efficient business model. They had proven the concept. They had built the perfect artist in D'Banj. Now it was time to scale. It was time to build the rest of the empire. With the Coco sound and D'Banj's charisma having conquered the continent, Don Jazzy, the system builder, turned his attention to expansion. A king needs a court, and an empire needs a dynasty. The Mo Hits label, which for years had been a two-man show, producer and artist, began to sign new talent. This wasn't just a random collection of artists, it was a curated all-star team, each member handpicked to fill a specific role. First came Wonder Cole. Discovered as a backup dancer for D'Banj, he was the vocal prodigy. He had a sweet, soulful, acrobatic voice that could ride any of Jazzy's beats with an R&B flair. He was the pure talent. Then came Dr. Acid, the cool one. A dentist by training, he brought a smooth, more Western-influenced hip-hop pop sensibility. And finally, there was DePrince, Don Jazzy's own younger brother, the playboy of the group, adding another layer of personality to the roster. With this crew, Don Jazzy's production evolved. He was no longer just making beats for D'Banj, he was creating bespoke sonic identities for each artist. For Wand Cole, he crafted the Mushin 2 Mo Hits album, a critically acclaimed masterpiece. The hit Bumper to Bumper was a perfect example. It was still a minimalist jazzy beat, but Wand Cole's melodic skill on top of it created a pop classic. The label was now a hydra. If D'Banj didn't get you, Wand Cole would. They released a group album, Curriculum Vitae, a posse-cut compilation that was a pure, unadulterated victory lap. They were untouchable. They were the New York Yankees of Afrobeats. They were the only conversation. And then, in 2011, they launched the missile. Oliver Twist. It was the perfect song, the culmination of everything they had built. The beat was a masterwork of Don Jazzy's minimalism, a thumping kick, a syncopated snare, and a grimy, addictive synth line that sounded like a malfunctioning video game. D'Banj was at his charismatic peak, telling a cheeky story about wanting more, like the famous Charles Dickens character, name-dropping all the famous women he desired. It was African, it was global, it was funny, and it was undeniably a hit. The song escaped Nigeria. It blew up in the UK clubs, landed on the BBC Radio 1 playlist, and eventually peaked at number 9 on the UK singles chart. The world took notice, and specifically Kanye West took notice. This is the mainstream historical fact that changed everything. Kanye, in 2011, was not just a rapper. He was the undisputed centre of the cultural universe. He was coming off the universally adored My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and was in the process of building his GOD music label into a super team, signing artists like Pusha T, Big Sean, and Kid Cudi. Kanye saw in D'Banj a raw, charismatic African star, and in Don Jazzy, he saw a producer with a sound he didn't have. He didn't just want the artist, he wanted the engine. In the summer of 2011, the deal was announced. Not just D'Banj, but Don Jazzy were signed to GOOD Music. For the Nigerian music industry, this was the rapture. It was the ultimate validation. Two of their own, the kids from London and Ajagunle, were now standing side by side with Jesus. The dream had been fully, impossibly realised. They were flown to New York to London to the legendary studios where Kanye was recording his collaborative album with Jay-Z, Watch the Throne. And this is where the crack begins. The dream when viewed up close, was not what it seemed. Don Jazzy, the quiet, meticulous system builder, the Don who controlled every aspect of his sound and his business in his Lagos studio, was now a small fish in a vast, chaotic American ocean. He was in rooms with Jay-Z, Beyoncé, and dozens of other producers, all vying for Kanye's notoriously erratic attention. This was not his system. He couldn't control the variables. This is where a quirky, almost sad tidbit emerges. Don Jazzy has a production credit on the Watch the Throne track Liftoff, alongside Kanye, Jeff Pasker, and several others. But his most famous appearance from this era is a blink and you'll miss it cameo in the video for Otis. He's just there, standing in the background, looking slightly lost while Kanye and Jay-Z tear apart a Maybach. It's a visual metaphor for his entire God music experience, present but not participating. D'banj, on the other hand, loved it. This was everything his Coco Master persona was built for. He thrived in the chaos, the celebrity, the international spotlight. He had tasted global stardom, and he was now addicted. He wanted to be a permanent fixture in this new world. Don Jazzy, meanwhile, just wanted to go home. He wanted to get back to his Lagos studio, to his Mavin 1.0 crew of Wand, SID and Da Prince, who were all now sitting idle, their chief producer AWOL in America. The two founders, the symbiotic pair, were now pulling in violently opposite directions. D'banj wanted to stay in the US and chase the global, American-led dream. Don Jazzy saw the future, his future, in building the African infrastructure, in owning the local market completely. He realised that in the US, he was just another producer in a room. In Nigeria, he was the Don. Analysts and insiders still debate whether the God music deal was a genuine opportunity or a Trojan horse that exposed fatal cracks in the Mo Hits partnership. Did Kanye's intervention accelerate their success, or did it simply poison the well? The tension became unbearable. D'banj, feeling stifled by Don Jazzy's reluctance, saw his partner as lacking ambition. Don Jazzy, seeing his life's work and his other artists languishing, saw D'banj as a man who had forgotten where he came from, chasing a ghost. The arguments, once brotherly disagreements, became bitter and financial. The Coco, the main point, was no longer shared. The two halves of the Mo Hits brain were at war. The dream had become a prison, and the only way out was to burn the whole thing down. The partnership, once a perfect symbiosis, was now a parasitic relationship killing its host. The God music deal, which was supposed to be their crowning achievement, had become a golden prison. It exposed the fundamental, irreconcilable difference between the two men. D'banj was an artist, a performer. He chased the spotlight, the applause, the next big high. Don Jazzy was an architect, a systems builder. He chased control, ownership, and the long-term compounding value of an ecosystem. The arguments were no longer about music. They were about money, about respect, and about the future. D'banj felt he was Mo Hits, that his star power had built the house. Don Jazzy knew he was the one who had drawn the blueprints, laid the foundation, and paid the contractors. The tension, which had been simmering for months in expensive US recording studios and sterile hotel rooms, finally boiled over when they returned to Lagos. The Mo Hits, all-stars, Wanda Cole, Dr. Sid, Da Prince, who had been patiently waiting for their Don to return, found him changed. He was quiet, withdrawn, and clearly unhappy. D'banj was the opposite. He was distant, his sights set on a global horizon that didn't seem to include them. The family dynamic that Don Jazzy had so carefully cultivated was shattered. It was now D'banj and everyone else. The final split in early 2012 was not a quiet corporate handshake. It was a messy, public and brutal divorce. It was a schism that tore the Nigerian music industry in half, and it became horribly public, as all modern tragedies do through the internet. This is the quirky tidbit that defines the entire era, the leaked emails. In March 2012, the prominent, and at the time all-powerful, blogger Linda Ikeji published a series of private, scathing emails allegedly exchanged between the two camps. It was the digital equivalent of finding your parents' divorce papers, filled with angry handwritten notes in the margins. The emails were raw. They spoke of arguments over royalties, of D'banj allegedly trying to buy Don Jazzy out, of disagreements over the It's Don Jazzy Again tag. They painted a picture of two kings, once brothers, now locked in a bitter struggle for the throne. Media analysts and pop culture historians still argue over who truly leaked those infamous emails. Was it a calculated, scorched earth move by one side to win the narrative war? Was it a third-party hack? Or was it, as some cynics suggest, a brilliantly orchestrated mutual publicity stunt to frame their next ventures? The latter seems unlikely, given the genuine, palpable bitterness that followed. The leak forced their hands. The private war was now a public spectacle. Don Jazzy, the man who controlled everything, had lost control of his own story. On March 17th, 2012, he did something he had never done. He took to Twitter, his new medium of choice, and confirmed it himself in a series of solemn, heartbroken tweets. "It is with a heavy heart that I announce the end of a long era and crusade. I am deeply saddened by this turn of events." The empire was officially dead. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The public reaction was one of national mourning. This wasn't just a label breaking up. It was the label. It was the sound of Nigeria for the past 7 years. Fans were forced to pick a side in a custody battle they never asked for. Were you Team D'banj, the ambitious global superstar, the Coco master who had earned the right to chase his dream? Or were you Team Don Jazzy, the betrayed architect, the quiet genius who had built the whole thing, only to be abandoned? This cultural schism was happening against the backdrop of a very real national crisis, a historical fact that amplified the anxiety. Just 2 months earlier, in January 2012, the Occupy Nigeria protests had exploded. The government's sudden, shocking removal of the national fuel subsidy had sent prices skyrocketing overnight, and millions of Nigerians poured into the streets in the largest, most coordinated public protest the country had seen in a generation. The nation felt like it was breaking, and now Mo Hits was breaking too. It felt personal. It felt like another pillar of stability, even a cultural one, was crumbling. In the wreckage, the assets had to be divided. This wasn't just about unsold CDs, it was about a brand, a legacy. D'banj, the artist, kept his GOOD music deal. He was the one who walked away to pursue the international dream. Don Jazzy, the producer, was left with the foundations. He kept the other artists, Wanda Cole, Dr. SED, and his brother DePrince. He kept the Nigerian studio, the local infrastructure. But he had lost his lead artist, his co-founder, his best friend, and he had lost the name. Mo Hits was a brand built on the partnership. It couldn't exist with only one of its founders. Don Jazzy was, for the first time in his professional life, in freefall. He was 29 years old, and the empire he had spent his entire adult life building was gone. The Don was a king without a kingdom. The man whose tag, "It's Don Jazzy again," was a guarantee of success, was now facing a profound public failure. The schism was complete. He was back in Lagos, sitting in the same studio where Tongolo and Oliver Twist had been born. But the silence was deafening. He was alone. The quiet kid from Ajegunle, the McDonald's worker, the bouncing knight, had built a castle and watched his partner hand the keys to a foreign invader and walk away. He had to start again, from zero. But this time, he wasn't an unknown kid with a plan. He was a dethroned king, and the entire continent was watching to see if he would, or could, ever get back up. For a few weeks, there was silence, a deafening public silence. Michael Collins Ayra, the man who had been the thumping rhythmic heartbeat of Nigerian pop for nearly 8 years, was quiet. The industry and the internet was not. The obituaries were written. Don Jazzy was finished. He was the producer, the backroom guy. D'banj was the star, the product. And the product had just walked out the door, taking the GOOD music contract, the international fame, and the entire Coco brand with him. Pundits and bloggers, the new kings of media, were brutal. He was a one-trick pony. He was the guy who made one kind of beat for one kind of artist. He was a has-been at 29. It was a digital public shaming, a crucifixion for a crime of... what exactly? For being abandoned. But Don Jazzy, the quiet observer from Ajegunle, was not panicking. He wasn't grieving, he was calculating. He was in his studio, but he wasn't just making beats. He was making plans. He had learned the single most expensive, painful, and valuable lesson of his life. Never, ever build your entire empire on the unstable foundation of a single personality. A star is a variable. A star is volatile. A star can be poached. D'banj wasn't the first superstar to leave his producer. It's the oldest story in the music business. The historical fact is, from Berry Gordy and Motown's artists to Suge Knight and Dr. Dre, the schism between talent and the house that built it is almost a mathematical certainty. Don Jazzy, a student of the game, knew this. He had just lived through the African chapter, and he swore, never again. The system would be the star. The brand would be the product. The process would be the asset. On May 8, 2012, a mere 2 months after the Mo Hits eulogies were published, Don Jazzy announced his resurrection. He didn't just tweet a link to a new song, he unveiled a fully formed corporation. The name was Mavin Records, but it wasn't just Mavin Records. The full official name was the Supreme Mavin Dynasty. Let's just break that down. It was a mission statement disguised as a brand. Mavin, a quirky tidbit of a word, is Yiddish, meaning a connoisseur, an expert in a field. He was no longer just a hitmaker, he was the head of a house of experts. Supreme was a flex, a direct challenge to the idea that he was now a second-rate player. And Dynasty, that was the key. Mo Hits was a squad, a crew. This was a dynasty. Dynasties are about bloodlines, legacy, and long-term multi-generational rule. He wasn't building a house, he was founding a kingdom, and a kingdom needs a court. He retained the loyalists, the ones who had stayed with him in the fire, his brother De Prince, Dr. Sid, and the vocal powerhouse Wanda Cole. This was the Mavin 1.0 crew. But he knew he couldn't just run back the old formula. He needed something new. He needed a queen, and he found one. His first and most critical new signing was Tiwa Savage. This was an absolute masterstroke. Tiwa wasn't some unknown kid he'd found on the street. She was a seasoned professional, a graduate of the Berklee College of Music. She had been a songwriter for Sony's Dre TV, penning tracks for American artists like Fantasia. She'd sung background vocals for George Michael. Yes, that George Michael, the man responsible for the Careless Whisper saxophone solo that has probably created more accidental human beings than any other song in history. By signing Tiwa, Don Jazzy did 3 things. First, he immediately silenced the boys' club narrative that had surrounded Mo Hits. Second, he signed an artist with a truly global technical skill set, signalling his own international ambitions. Third, he signed someone who understood the business, someone who had been inside the American system and wouldn't be starstruck by it. She was a partner, not just a protege. But the final brutal checkmate move came on the very same day, May 8, 2012. He didn't just announce the Supreme Mavin Dynasty, he released its first album, Solar Plexus. It wasn't a single, it wasn't an EP, it was a 13-track fully formed compilation album, dropped on the world with zero warning. This surprise drop, a tactic that Beyoncé would be lauded for globally a year later, was a tactical nuke in the Nigerian market. It was a punch to the solar plexus. The message was impossibly clear. While you were gossiping about my death, I was in the lab, working. The album itself was a statement. The sound was different. It was darker, more electronic, moodier. Don Jazzy's production had evolved. It was less of the bright, bouncy Coco sound, and more of a brooding, complex, synth-heavy atmosphere. It wasn't Oliver Twist. It was the sound of a man who had been through a war and was now building his fortress. Business analysts and music historians still debate whether Solar Plexus was a commercial success or a strategic statement. It didn't have a singular, culture-shaking hit like, "Why me?" But that wasn't the point. The album wasn't the product. The label was the product. The album was a 13-track demonstration of capability. It showcased the new, versatile Don Jazzy. It reintroduced the loyalists. And it presented Tiwa Savage as the new flagship artist. It changed the entire conversation. In 24 hours, Don Jazzy went from D'banj's old producer to the CEO of the Supreme Mavin Dynasty. He hadn't just survived the schism, he had monetized it. He had used the vacuum, the doubt, the silence as a launchpad. He had, in essence, failed upwards, turning the biggest loss of his career into the foundation of a $200 million empire. He was no longer just the Don, he was the chairman. The Solar Plexus album was a statement, a flag planted in the smouldering ruins of Mo Hits. It announced, "I am still here." But it was not a commercial juggernaut. It was moody, it was atmospheric, and the public, still nursing a collective heartbreak over the D'banj split, was hesitant. They respected the move, but they weren't in love. D'banj, meanwhile, was leveraging the GOD music machine, and his global hit Oliver Twist was the soundtrack of the Nigerian diaspora. The narrative was solidifying. D'banj was the star, Don Jazzy the jilted producer. Jazzy knew he didn't just need to make a statement, he needed a hit, a massive, undeniable, culture-shifting hit, and he needed it to come from someone new. His entire focus turned to Tiwa Savage. She was the new flagship, she had to work. He poured his most refined, most polished, and most commercially ruthless production into her. He shed the dark, broody solar plexus sound and engineered pure, radio-friendly dynamite. The first missile was Kele Kele Love. It was a masterpiece of pop construction. It had a Don Jazzy beat, yes, but it was brighter, faster. And Tiwa was a revelation. She was a fully formed star. She had the voice, the look, the dance skills, and the janned polish. The song was an immediate smash, a ladies' anthem that took over the clubs. He followed it with Love Me Through Isko X, another perfectly calibrated pop song. Don Jazzy was proving in real time that his sound was not a trick. He could make the gritty Why Me, the moody I'm a Mavin, and this glossy, expensive, international-grade pop. Tiwa's 2013 debut album, Once Upon a Time, was a commercial and critical success, establishing her as the undisputed first lady of Nigerian music. The dynasty had its queen. But just as the new castle seemed secure, another wall collapsed. In late 2013, Wanda Cole, the golden voice, the vocal prodigy, the most purely talented member of the entire Mo Hits Mavin lineage, left. And this split was, in some ways, uglier than the first. It wasn't a philosophical big-picture disagreement. It was a grubby public fight over credit. Wanda released a song, Babyface. Don Jazzy promptly went on Twitter and released his own original demo of the same song, proving he had created it. It was a brutal, here are the receipts moment. The public feud was short but intense. Wandy, the heir apparent, was gone. This could have been the kill shot. The press narrative wrote itself. Don Jazzy, the tyrant producer, so controlling he drove away D'banj and now Wanda Cole. He just can't keep talent. The supreme Mavin Dynasty was looking pretty empty. It was effectively just Don Jazzy, his brother Dr. Sid and Tiwa. But Don Jazzy, the system builder, had learned his lesson from the D'banj schism. The system cannot depend on one person, or as it turned out, two. His response was not to find the new Wanda. His response was to scale. He decided to replace one golden goose with a whole damn farm. He had been quietly running a Mavin Academy in the background, scouting young, raw talent and training them in his system. Now he activated them. He unleashed Corrida Bello, a young, impossibly handsome singer with a trademark wink that made him instant teen idol material. He unleashed Dija, an exotic, stylish Sierra Leonean Nigerian artist with a unique, airy voice. And he unleashed Ricardo Banks, a pure, unadulterate hit boy, a versatile, workmanlike artist who could sing, rap, and ride any beat. He signed 3 new artists at once. He wasn't just patching a hole, he was tripling his offensive line. This all happened as the Niger sound was becoming a certified global force. This is a mainstream historical fact. By 2014, artists like Wizkid and Davido, operating outside Don Jazzy's orbit, were scoring massive international hits. The game was no longer a one-man show. Don Jazzy was no longer the undisputed king. He was a king defending his territory against new, powerful, and wildly popular emperors. He needed a show of force. He needed to prove that his new, hodgepodge crew was a real team. And so, in May 2014, he dropped Dora Bucci. Analysts still argue whether this song was a meticulously planned marketing masterstroke or a pure, accidental stroke of cultural lightning. It was, on its face, a posse cut. A simple, hypnotic, almost annoyingly catchy beat. A roll call, but it was so much more. The song featured everyone: Don Jazzy, Tiwa, SID, to Prince, and the 3 new kids, Corridi, Ricardo, and Dija. And the central hook was a word that didn't exist. Doro. What was Doro? It was a quirky tidbit of pure branding genius. Don Jazzy himself defined it in a tweet. Dora Bucci is a person or an individual that is awesome, amazing, rich, swaggy, sexy. A Don. He had manufactured a new piece of slang, a Mavin exclusive lexicon, a new Coco. To be Doro was to be, well, a Mavin. The song was a viral bomb. It was a phenomenon. It was everywhere. The accompanying video was a lavish, high-budget affair showing the entire crew as a unified, wealthy and joyous family. It wasn't just a song, it was a relaunch of the brand. It was a 5-minute advertisement for the Supreme Mavin Dynasty, and it was a certified banger. It won Song of the Year at the Headies, Nigeria's Grammys. But he didn't stop. He immediately followed it with Adobe, another posse cut, and Luku Luku. It was a relentless barrage of hits, a shock and awe campaign. And then, the individual artists now introduced to the world launched their own missiles. Corrida Bello dropped Godwin in 2015. It was the final absolute victory. Godwin was a crossover mega hit, a song of pure, infectious gratitude. It was a song you could play in the club and your grandmother could sing in church. It was, financially speaking, a cultural blank check. Don Jazzy had done it. He had lost a banj, he had lost one coal, and it didn't matter. He had built a machine that was bigger than any single part. The Dorobuchi dynasty was complete. The Mavin machine was working. The Dorobuchi and Godwin era had proven that the system was viable. The label was profitable, the artists were stars, and the Supreme Mavin Dynasty was, by all metrics, a success. But Don Jazzy, the quiet observer, saw a new problem. A problem of personality. His new roster, Corrida Bello, Ricardo Banks, Dija, were young, vibrant, and digitally native. They were the Instagram generation, and he was still the Don. He was the old world boss, the silent, staff-wielding, intimidating figure from the Mo Hits era. He was the man who had public, bitter fights with D'banj and Wonder Cole. He was respected, but he wasn't liked. He was the stern, rich father in a house full of fun-loving kids, and the disconnect was palpable. In the old world, respect was enough. In the new world, the one being built on likes and shares, respect was useless without affection. He realised he had to do something drastic. He had to kill the Don. That persona, which he and D'banj had carefully crafted in the mid-2000s to command respect, was now a liability. It was a relic. It was a brand suicide mission, a complete and total teardown of his public identity, and he would use the very platforms his new artists mastered, Twitter and Instagram. This pivot was happening right as a crucial mainstream historical fact was changing Nigeria, the explosion of affordable mobile data. Between 2015 and 2017, the proliferation of undersea fibre optic cables, combined with aggressive competition between telecoms giants like MTN and Globacom, crashed the price of data. Suddenly, millions of Nigerians had smartphones, and those smartphones had a fast, cheap connection to the world. Instagram, once a luxury for the rich, became a tool for the masses. Don Jazzy didn't just see a trend, he saw a new, free-to-use global distribution network. His first move was on Twitter, and it was pure, unadulterated bribery. He became the king of giveaways. This was a uniquely Nigerian digital hustle phenomenon, and he perfected it. He would tweet, "I'm in a good mood, who needs N10,000?" or "First 50 people to retweet this and drop their account number." And he would actually send the money. This was not philanthropy. It was a ruthless marketing campaign. It was, in modern tech terms, a customer acquisition cost. For the price of a few $1,000s a month, he was buying the direct, unwavering loyalty of hundreds of thousands of followers. He was bypassing the radio DJs, the bloggers, and the TV presenters, and creating a direct one-to-one relationship with the market. He became Don Baba J, the benevolent rich uncle who, on a whim, could just solve your problems. But Twitter was just for transactions. The real revolution, the true act of brand genius, happened on Instagram. This is the quirky tidbit that defines his entire modern-day success. He became a skit maker, a comedian, the supreme don of the music industry, a man worth tens of euros, millions of dollars, began posting lo-fi, self-shot videos, often in his pajamas from his lavish living room. He would use the new, goofy face filters. He would dance, awkwardly and joyfully, to his artist's new songs. He would, most famously, make endless self-deprecating jokes about his pot belly and his perpetually single status, often lamenting his unrequited fictional love for the global superstar Rihanna. He completely defanged himself. The intimidating silent boss was gone, replaced by a lovable, goofy, slightly lonely rich guy. Analysts and brand experts still argue whether this lovable Don persona was a genuine reflection of his personality or the most cynical, brilliant marketing pivot in Afrobeats history. The truth, as always, is that it was a synthesis of both. It was his real, playful personality, a side he'd always shown in private, but now he was weaponizing it. He was building an unassailable personal brand, a social moat around his entire business, and it worked. It was impossible to hate him. How could you? He was in on every joke. He was the one making the jokes. Any blogger or critic trying to paint him as a cold-hearted industry tyrant. The narrative that had stuck after the Wand and D'banj splits now just looked bitter and ridiculous. The public's response would be, "What are you talking about? That's Don Baba J. He's hilarious. He just posted a skit with his mum." He didn't just make skits alone. He began collaborating with the new wave of online digital native comedians, people like Broda Shaggy, Crazy Clown and Leticia Lenu. He would feature in their skits, often playing the part of the exasperated rich Don they were trying to scam. This was a masterstroke of cross-pollination. He gave them legitimacy and a massive new audience, and in return, they reinforced his new brand as accessible, funny and supportive of new talent. He wasn't just a gatekeeper, he was a platform. This new persona had a direct, profound impact on his business. He was now, by a massive margin, the most followed, most engaged and most trusted music executive on the continent. He had more followers than all his artists combined. He no longer needed to sell his artists to the public, he just had to introduce them. A single post from Don Jazzy, a single skit of him dancing to a new song, was now more powerful than a month of radio play. He had created the ultimate promotional tool, himself. He was the lovable face of the entire Mavin empire, an unassailable shield of comedy and vibes. And it was this new, all-seeing, all-engaged, online 24/7 Don Baba J who was about to stumble upon a grainy, 1-minute freestyle from a kid in Benin City. The lovable Don persona was complete. Don Jazzy had transformed himself from a feared boss into a beloved uncle, a national treasure. His social media was a fortress of goodwill, his comment sections a rolling festival of laugh emojis and Baba J accolades. He had, in effect, become the ultimate promotion machine, a one-man media house with millions of subscribers. But this machine, as powerful as it was still running the Dorobuchi era engine. It was built to create Nigerian superstars, to saturate the local market, to win Song of the Year at the Headies, to get Godwin played in every church and club from Lagos to Abuja. The Mavin 1.0 and 2.0 artists, while stars, were fundamentally local. Their success was defined by the Nigerian border. Don Jazzy, the quiet observer, saw the next ceiling approaching. The historical fact is, by 2018, Wizkid and Davido had already broken that ceiling. They had signed major international deals with Sony and RCA, they were collaborating with Drake and Chris Brown, and they were selling out arenas in London. They had proven that Afrobeats, or Afrobeats to the world, was a viable global export, not just a regional sound. Don Jazzy's Godwin was a bigger local hit, but their music was travelling further. The Mavin Dynasty, for all its supremacy, was at risk of becoming a purely domestic power, a local champion. He needed a global artist. He needed a new kind of weapon, and he found him, as one does in the 21st century, by scrolling through Instagram. The discovery was not his, not directly. It was a product of the system he had built. He had empowered his inner circle, none more so than his own brother, DePrince. DePrince, the playboy from the Mo Hits days, had matured into a sharp-eared executive. In 2018, he posted a snippet of his own song, Gucci Gang, on Instagram. A few days later, a 17-year-old kid from Benin City, named Divine Ikebor, posted a 1-minute video, a fiery, melodic, trap-infused freestyle, over that very beat. It was different. This kid wasn't just rapping, he was singing, he was cooing, he was mumbling, all in a strange, captivating Indian and Arabic inflected cadence. He had the swagger of Young Thug, the melodies of Travis Scott, but the accent was pure Edo. DePrince saw it, and he didn't just like it. He didn't send a DM. He got on a plane, flew to Benin City, and hunted this kid down. He went directly to his mother, and in proper Nigerian fashion, made his case. The kid's name was Rema, and he was the perfect, tragic raw material for a superstar. This is a quirky, sad tidbit that fueled his art. Rema was not a happy-go-lucky kid. He had grown up in the ancient mystical city of Benin, but his life was marked by darkness. He had lost his father and his older brother, both under grim circumstances. His soul, as he would later say, got darker. He was a rapper in his church, but he was listening to Daft Punk, American rock, and Bollywood, soundtracks. He was an emo kid in an Afrobeats world. He was, in short, everything Don Jazzy's system wasn't built for, and that's why Don Jazzy knew he was the one. Rema was brought to Lagos, but he was not unveiled. He was hidden. He was put into the Mavin Academy, a secret 18-month artist development program. Analysts still debate the inner workings of this academy, but insiders describe it as a K-pop-style hit factory, an X-Men mansion for a new generation of mutants. Rema himself confirmed that they had to teach him Afrobeats delivery. His natural impulse was all trap. They refined his sound, his look, his persona. They didn't change him, they focused him. And then Don Jazzy executed the true pivot. He didn't sign Rema to Mavin Records. He had learned from the D'banj and Wondercol splits that a single structure is a single point of failure. Instead, he funded DePrince to create a new subsidiary label, Jonzing World. Rema was Jonzing World's first artist in partnership with Mavin. This was a new business model. Don Jazzy was no longer just a kingmaker. He was a king funder. He was becoming a venture capitalist. Mavin was no longer just a label, it was a platform. In March 2019, Rema was activated, but the launch strategy was a complete break from the past. He didn't drop a single, catchy, Godwin-style song. He dropped a 4-track, self-titled EP, Rema. It was designed from its first second to confuse, divide and conquer. It was a portfolio of sounds. It had Why, a pure heartbroken emo trap song for the kids who listened to Juice WRLD. And then it had Dumabi, a bright, deceptively simple and ludicrously catchy Afro-pop song that would become the biggest hit of the year. But the real strategic missile, the one aimed at the world, was the lead track, Iron Man. It was weird. It was a slinking, hypnotic ballad built around a plucked Bollywood-style string sample. Rema's vocals were a mournful alien coo. It was a song with no precedent. It was not Afrobeats. It was, as Rema would call it, Afro-rave. The local Nigerian market was confused. Dumebi was the hit, no question. But Iron Man, what was that? It was a statement. It was art. It was a signal to the global market that this was not another local champion. And the signal was received. In August 2019, the ultimate validation came. Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States, released his annual highly anticipated summer playlist. And there, nestled between Frank Sinatra and the Black Keys, was Iron Man by Rema, a 19-year-old kid from Benin City. Don Jazzy hadn't paid for that. He hadn't used his lovable Don persona to get it. He had done it with pure, unfiltered, undeniably unique product. The Rema pivot was a success. He had built a new artist, on a new business model, with a new sound, and the most powerful cultural tastemaker on earth had just co-signed him. The game had changed, and Don Jazzy once again was the one holding the new rulebook. The Obama playlist co-sign for Iron Man was more than a PR victory. It was a proof of concept. It confirmed Don Jazzy's hypothesis. The global market wasn't just hungry for Afrobeats, it was hungry for newness, for any sound that felt authentic and strange. The Rema experiment, built on the new Jonzing World subsidiary model, had worked. But Rema was a mutant, a one-of-one discovery. The Don in Don Jazzy, the systems builder, wasn't satisfied with a single successful experiment. He didn't want to just find global superstars, he wanted to build them. He wanted a factory, he wanted an assembly line, and the Rema experience had taught him exactly what was needed. This led to the formalization of the Mavin Academy. It was an idea he'd toyed with for years, but now it became a core, funded part of the business. This shift was supercharged by a crucial mainstream historical fact. In 2019, Mavin Records secured a multi-million-dollar investment from Kupanda Holdings, a joint venture between Kupanda Capital and TPG Growth. This wasn't just money, it was smart money. It was venture capital. Kupanda didn't just invest in Don Jazzy's ear for a hit, they invested in his system, with the explicit goal of scaling it for a global audience. This cash injection was the financial engine that turned the Mavin Academy from a loose concept into a ruthless K-pop-style artist development pipeline. It was a finishing school for superstars, and it cost, by Don Jazzy's own admission, between $100,000 and $300,000 to activate every single artist that came out of it. Now, he had the system and the capital. He just needed the next piece of raw material, and once again, he found her on Instagram. Her name was Oinkansola Sarah Adera Bigbe. She was 18, posting covers and a few original freestyles. And the discovery, a quirky tidbit in itself, was a chain of digital connections. He had asked a young Gen Z influencer he followed to send him any talented people she knew. She sent him a list of pages. He scanned them, noted them. Then, in late 2019, the young singer posted a grainy freestyle, a song she'd written that was different. It wasn't a typical love song. It was a dark, moody, Gen Z-specific lament about peer pressure and drugs. It was the same emo spark he'd seen in Rema. He immediately slid into her DMs. She didn't reply. She either didn't see it or, more likely, assumed it was a 413 scam. "Hi, I'm Don Jazzy. I want to make you a star." It was too good to be true. So, Don Jazzy, the CEO of the supreme Mavin Dynasty, did what any good A&R would do. He found her brother's Instagram account and DM'd him. This time, they connected. Her name was Ayra Starr, and she was not activated immediately. She was instead disappeared. She was signed in late 2019 and put straight into the academy. For over a year, she was in the lab. This wasn't just vocal coaching. This was media training, brand strategy, dance, styling, and, most importantly, songwriting boot camps. She was paired with producers like Valuation. She co-wrote endlessly with her brother Dami. Don Jazzy's system wasn't just finding a girl who could sing, it was manufacturing an entire identity, a sonic palette, and a high-concept brand, all in-house, all in secret. They were building a Gen Z sounding board, a celestial voice, a star ready for the billboard, not just the block. Analysts and music historians still argue whether this intensive K-pop-style development system is the future of Afrobeats, or a dangerous fast factory farm model that sacrifices raw authenticity for a polished, market-tested product. Is an artist who has been activated for $300,000 truly an artist, or are they a startup? Don Jazzy, the pragmatist, had his answer. The market had changed. Raw didn't sell records globally, Package did. On January 22, 2021, the system was unveiled. The launch of Ayra Starr was a masterpiece of shock and awe, a testament to a perfected, confident process. This was not the Rema launch, which was a portfolio of different EPs. This was a single, simultaneous strike. Don Jazzy unveiled her on his Instagram, and on the very same night, her debut, 5-track, self-titled EP Ayra Starr was released on all platforms. There was no wait and see. There was no let's drop a single and test the waters. It was, here is your new queen. Here is her body of work. You're welcome. The lead single, Away, was the ultimate flex. It wasn't Dorabuchi. It wasn't a Fuji drum party starter. It was a moody, mid-tempo, R&B alti-infused track about a breakup. It was a vibe. The video was a high-art, high-concept visual referencing Joan of Arc and the Dahomey Amazons, positioning her not as a girl next door but as a warrior queen. The system was so confident, so well-funded, that her debut was an art house film. The rest of the EP was a sonic portfolio, showcasing her range from Afropop to trap. The Mavin machine had analysed the Rema data and perfected the launch. They had created an artist who was, from her very first second in the public eye, 100% complete. The factory was open for business, and its first product was flawless. The Ayra Starr activation was a roaring success. The Mavin Academy was no longer a theory, it was a proven, repeatable process. Don Jazzy, the system builder, had perfected his manufacturing line. But this new generation of artists, Rema and Ayra, were different from the Dorabuchi crew. They weren't just Nigerian stars, they were from day one global products. They were Gen Z whisperers, whose music, style and vibe were designed to be as resonant in Berlin and Mumbai as they were in Lagos. This required a new kind of corporate structure. The old Mavin Records, a label designed to get Godwin played on Nigerian radio, was now obsolete. It was time to build the mothership. This is when Mavin Global truly crystallized. it ceased to be just a record label and became a diversified 360-degree entertainment venture. This was the ultimate expression of the Don as a venture capitalist. Mavin Records, the label, was now just one division, the product division. Alongside it, a new, far more powerful infrastructure was built. This included a publishing arm to control the song copyrights, a management arm to guide the artists' careers, an influencing arm, leveraging Don Jazzy's own massive social footprint, and most critically, an in-house creative and strategic division. This creative and strategic team is the quirky and perhaps most valuable tidbit in the entire Mavin empire. It's the closest thing Afrobeats has to a big data operation. This is not just a room of cool young people, it's an analytics department. They function less like a record label and more like a tech company, or perhaps a hedge fund. They track everything. They analyze TikTok sounds, trace the origin of a dance challenge, monitor Spotify listener demographics in real time, A/B test different song intros on digital ads, and build complex listener profiles. They were the ones who saw the Rema data and knew Iron Man would appeal to the Obamas of the world, while Dumabi would conquer the streets. They were the ones who engineered the Away challenge for Ayra Starr, watching the data and pouring digital ad spend on it at the precise moment it began to trend. Analysts and music business experts still debate whether Mavin Global, in this new form, is a music company, or a tech company that sells music. The answer, of course, is both. It was using a 21st century data-driven tech startup model to manufacture and market a 20th century product, pop stars. This new model was perfected during the single greatest disruption to the music industry in a century, the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the mainstream historical fact that, ironically, minted Mavin's global status. In 2020, as the world shut down, the entire music industry model collapsed. Live shows? Gone. Touring? Gone. Club appearances? Gone. An artist's entire revenue stream was vaporized overnight. It was an extinction-level event, but not for Mavin. Don Jazzy's new model was, by sheer dumb luck, pandemic-proof. He had just spent 3 years divesting from the live model and investing in a purely digital one. His artists were digital natives. His lovable Don persona was a social media juggernaut, and his creative and strategic team was built to conquer the internet, not the arena. While other labels panicked, Mavin doubled down. They had a world, locked in their homes, doom-scrolling for 12 hours a day. It was a captive audience. Ayra Starr's launch in January 2021 was perfectly timed to hit this new, terminally online market. This era also defined the artist as platform model. The artist was no longer just the person who sang the song. The artist was the hub for a wheel of diversified revenue. Rema was the perfect example. His music was the engine, but the Rema brand was the platform. He launched a massive brand partnership with Pepsi. He launched another with Puma, designing his own Afro-rave tracksuits. His music, particularly the slow-burning 2022 hit Calm Down, was being used by the data team as a global seed. The song wasn't just a hit, it was a key. It was a key to unlock the Indian market, the Middle Eastern market, the Latin American market. It was a platform for the Selena Gomez remix, which was a purely strategic, data-driven decision to conquer the final frontier, America. Ayra Starr was the same. Her music was the platform. She became a brand ambassador for fashion labels, for beauty brands. She was a Gen Z asset that could be licensed. This is what the Kupanda Holdings investors had bought. They hadn't bought Dorobucci. They had bought a factory that produced high-growth, globally viable, Gen Z-focused digital assets. Don Jazzy had built a machine that turned Instagram kids into multi-platform revenue streams. He was no longer just the Don. He was the chairman, the VC, and the chief data scientist all rolled into one. And the factory was now running at full capacity, activating a new relentless wave of products. The poet Ladipo, the soul singer, Johnny Drill, and the next-gen Academy graduates. Magix, Boy Spice, and Bayani. Each one was a new startup being launched from the Mavin platform. The Mavin factory was now operating at a terrifying efficiency. The artist as platform model, supercharged by the creative and strategic data team, was no longer a Nigerian business. It was a global export machine. The data proved it. Rema's Calm Down was not just a hit. It was a statistical anomaly, a pandemic of its own. It became the first African artist-led track to surpass 1 billion, that's with a B, streams on Spotify. It charted in dozens of countries. Ayra Starr's Rush was a TikTok-fueled wildfire, earning her a Grammy nomination. The system had, in less than 4 years, produced 2 of the biggest non-American, non-European, non-Korean artists on Earth. And in 2023, the world's financial titans decided they didn't want to just license the products, they wanted to buy the factory. The 2019 investment from Kupanda Holdings and TPG Growth was never a forever deal. That's not how venture capital works. It was, as the TPG partner had told Don Jazzy, a bet on him because he had failed with Mo Hits and learned. They had invested $10 million in his system. Now, 4 years later, that system was spitting out billion stream assets. It was time for the investors to cash out to get their exit. And so, an independent investment bank named Shot Tower Capital was hired to, in polite terms, explore a sale or investment. In blunter terms, to start a bidding war. In October 2023, the first shot was fired. Billboard magazine, the music industry's Bible, published an exclusive report. Mavin Global, it said, was exploring a sale. The valuation, according to sources, was over $125 million, with a potential to reach $150 million to $200 million. This is the quirky and utterly brilliant tidbit of this whole affair. Analysts and financial experts still argue whether this leak was an act of journalism or the most brilliant piece of financial marketing in modern music history. It was almost certainly the latter. It was Shot Tower Capital and the Mavin board, using Billboard as a bullhorn to signal to the market, the auction is open and this is the starting price. Don't lowball us. The suitors who emerged were the 2 biggest predators in the global music ocean. On one side, you had Universal Music Group, UMG. This is the old money, the largest, most powerful music corporation on Earth. They are the descendants of RCA, of Polygram, of Motown. They are the empire. They are, in fact, the very company Don Jazzy had already been partnering with. Rema was distributed by UMG's Virgin Music, and Ayra Starr was linked with Republic. They had been dating, and now they were looking to marry. On the other side was Hybe, the new money, the new system. This is the South Korean entertainment Goliath that built BTS, the K-pop superstars. Hybe was not just a record label, it was a fan platform company. They were the masters of the Stan army, of weaving music, merchandise and digital content into a single, obsessive ecosystem. They were, in effect, the only other company on Earth that understood Mavin's artist as platform model, because they were running the $50 billion Korean version of it. This was not just a sale, it was a referendum on the future of music. UMG wanted Mavin to plug Afrobeats into its massive global existing distribution network. Hybe wanted Mavin because it saw a kindred spirit, a proven academy system that it could integrate into its own, data-driven, K-pop-style global machine. It was the old empire versus the new. Don Jazzy, the quiet kid from Ajigunli, was now the single most desirable asset in the global music business. He was at the centre of a bidding war between the company that owned the Beatles and the company that owned BTS. This is a mainstream historical fact that must be appreciated. A genre, Afrobeats, that a decade prior was dismissed as local noise or world music, was now the subject of a 9-figure bidding war. It was the final deafening validation. It was the culmination of everything: the London hustle, the Mo Hits schism, the Dorobuchi rebuild, the lovable Don pivot, and the Mavin Academy system. He wasn't just selling songs, he was selling the engine. And 2 of the most powerful companies in the world were willing to pay, as it turned out, far more than that initial leaked $150 million price tag.
And then be 1 million. So make I dey write these names down. So I should be writing the names. Write down the names. I need to hear. Now I find money now. And I've forgotten all the people that borrowed money from my hand that owe me now. I can't remember some of them. I know write their name down. I beg, if you know they are owing me, I've forgotten. But please come and pay me pay me, even if it's half of the money they are owing me. Because as you can see, my eye is red. It's actually really red, but because of filter on this video now, it's showing like as if it's white, but it's actually red though.
The bidding war was short, civilized, and utterly brutal. It was a checkbook duel between the old world establishment, Universal Music Group, and the new world disruptor, Hybe. The Hybe proposition was fascinating. A K-pop-style, tech-driven merger that could have created a truly global, systematic Stan Army-fueled machine. But Don Jazzy, the man who had been burned by a global superstar partner once before, was a pragmatist. He looked at the board, and he saw that his pieces, his king, Rema, and his queen, Ayra Starr, were already in business with UMG. Rema was being distributed by Virgin, a UMG arm. Ayra Starr was partnered with Republic, another UMG label. The dating phase had been going on for years, and it was working. The system was already integrated. Why rewire the whole house when you could just sell the deed to the person already living in it? On February 26, 2024, the white smoke appeared. Universal Music Group announced it had acquired a majority stake in Mavin Global. The deal was done. The VCs who had invested in 2019, TPG and Kupanda, had their exit. TPG walked away fully, their multi-million-dollar bet having paid off handsomely. Kupanda, the ones who saw the vision first, smartly kept a minority stake, staying on as advisors. The final price tag was, as is standard in these corporate affairs, undisclosed. But the numbers that had been leaked to Billboard months before, that $150 million to $200 million valuation, hung in the air, tasting of truth. Don Jazzy, the kid who had flipped burgers at McDonald's and stood guard at a London door, had sold his system for a figure that made him one of the wealthiest and most powerful music executives on earth. Analysts and financial experts still argue over the semantics. Was this truly an acquisition, or more of a high-finance strategic partnership? UMG, the buyer, was careful in its language. This was not a hostile takeover. It was not a gut and rebrand operation. This was the most important, and frankly, genius, part of the entire deal. The terms were explicit. Mavin Global would maintain autonomy over its strategy and future talent development. And, as the non-negotiable cherry on top, Don Jazzy and his longtime COO, Tega Ogene-Jobo, would continue to lead the company. They hadn't just sold the factory, they had taken on a new, infinitely wealthy business partner who would now let them build more factories. Don Jazzy hadn't cashed out, he had leveled up. UMG, led by its legendary chairman Solution Grange, knew exactly what it was buying. They weren't just buying Rema and Ayra Starr, they were buying the next Rema and the next Ayra Starr. They were buying the Mavin Academy. They were buying Don Jazzy's ear and Tega's operational mind. They were buying the data-driven creative and strategic team. They were buying a proven, repeatable assembly line for minting global superstars. And they were buying it in the single most valuable, fastest-growing market on the planet. This is the mainstream historical fact that drove the nine-figure valuation. In 2022, the year Calm Down began its global conquest. The IFPI, the global music standards body, reported that sub-Saharan Africa was the fastest-growing region for recorded music consumption on Earth, with a jaw-dropping 34.7% year-on-year growth. It was the only region to grow by over 30%. Africa wasn't the future of music, it was the present, and Mavin held the keys to the entire kingdom. And the final, quirky tidbit. The handshake wasn't a handshake at all. It was a digital, global, corporate validation. Don Jazzy, the lovable Don, announced it on his Instagram, of course. He posted a sleek corporate graphic. He was humble, he was grateful, he thanked his Mavins and the fans, and then he went right back to posting skits. He went right back to being Don Baba J, the goofy, lovable, rich uncle. The $200 million handshake was for him just another piece of content. It was the ultimate flex. He had built a system so powerful that the biggest music company in the world bought it, and his only demand was that they not bother him while he and his team continued to run it. It was the anti-Debange deal. It wasn't about validation from a foreign star. It was about a foreign empire paying for the privilege of being in his house. The schism of 2012 was, at last, fully and finally healed. The quiet kid from Ajagunle had won. The $200 million handshake was not an end. It was not a retirement. For Don Jazzy, it was the final, irreversible validation of his system. His new role, in the wake of the Universal Music Group acquisition, was, by his own design, exactly the same as his old role. He remained CEO of the Supreme Mavin Dynasty. Tega Ogena-Jobo, his longtime COO, was elevated to president, a move Don Jazzy called his most genius. A testament to a man who now builds his executive team with the same care he builds his artists. This was the non-negotiable core of the deal. UMG bought the factory, but Don Jazzy and his team kept the keys, the blueprints, and complete creative autonomy. He wasn't a conquered king. He was an allied emperor, now with a global distribution network, an infinite budget, and the most powerful corporation in music history as his investor, not his boss. His legacy, therefore, is not a song. It's not Oliver Twist or Calm Down. His legacy is the Mavin Blueprint. It's a 5-part, repeatable, scalable system that has fundamentally changed the business of African culture. The first part is the Mavin Academy, a talent development pipeline so refined it costs, by his own admission, up to $300,000 to activate a single artist, manufacturing them from raw talent into global market-ready products. The second is the lovable Don persona, a masterclass in personal branding where the CEO, through his own goofy Rihanna-loving pajama-clad skits, became the company's single greatest marketing, promotion, and A&R platform, all with zero media buy. The third is the Johnsing World model, an internal venture capital arm where he empowers his own team, like his brother DePrince, to found new labels, diversifying his bets and striking gold with mutants like Rema. The fourth is the creative and strategic data team, an in-house analytics firm that treats a TikTok sound with the same seriousness as a hedge fund manager treats a stock. And the fifth, and most important, is the exit. This is the mainstream historical fact that will echo for a generation. Don Jazzy's sale to UMG was the first textile exit in Afrobeats history. He didn't just build a label, he built a startup, got venture capital funding from Kupanda Holdings, scaled it aggressively for 5 years, and then sold a majority stake at a 9-figure valuation. He proved to every creative in Africa that you don't have to just get signed by a foreign entity. You can build a system so powerful that the foreign entity pays you $200 million for the privilege of partnering with you. Of course, analysts still argue whether this is the salvation of Afrobeats or its sterilization. The debate is fierce. One camp warns that this is the cautionary tale the moment African intellectual property gets diluted by a global conglomerate that prioritizes a Calm Down remix with Selena Gomez over the raw, authentic sound of the Benin city streets. They point to other foreign investments, like Amazon Prime Video's retreat from local African content, as proof that this corporate embrace is fickle. The other camp, however, sees Don Jazzy's deal as the blueprint. They argue he just secured the bag, the whole bag, to build the infrastructure for Africa, in Africa, by Africans. He just used UMG's money to build a bigger, better Mavin Academy to fund the next 100 Remas and Ayra Stars. The quirky and telling tidbit is that in the middle of this high-finance, industry-defining debate, Don Jazzy is still on Instagram posting skits. The $200 million man, the most powerful executive in African music, is still just Don Baba J, laughing at his own jokes, proving that the most valuable part of the system might just be the man who acts like he isn't one. And so the story of Michael Collins' Ejire comes to a natural pause, not at an end, but at a new, impossibly high beginning. The lights of the Mavin Tower in Lagos are on, the data team is analysing a new TikTok sound, and somewhere in the academy, a new voice is being refined, a new superstar being polished, a new $300,000 bet being placed. As the sound of that distant future hit fades, let's just rest here for a moment. The true lesson from Don Jazzy's journey isn't really about music. It's about the profound, almost spiritual power of building a system instead of chasing a product. We spend so much of our lives, in our careers or our investments, trying to find that one hit, that one lucky stock pick, that one viral video, that one Oliver Twist that will change everything. But the Don's blueprint teaches us a quieter, more patient kind of wealth. It's the lesson of the McDonald's security guard, not of the superstar. It's about surviving the schism, the public failure, and using the bricks from that broken house to build a fortress. His genius was in realizing that the product, the artist, the song is volatile and temporary, but the process, the academy, the data, the brand, the system, that is the true compounding asset. He built a diversified portfolio, and his personal brand was the ultimate hedge fund. As you drift off, just hold on to that one thought. You don't need to find the next calm down. You just need to build your own personal Mavin Academy, your own system of learning, of growing, of branding, of trusting your own quiet, unshakable process. Because that is the only machine that can never be bought, only partnered with, and it is the only one that guarantees in the long, quiet night that you will always win.